Kalen DeBoer had Shaq-sized shoes to fill from Nick Saban, but one Tide alum thinks that the culture shift in Tuscaloosa has gone too far in the other direction. Has Alabama lost its way? Plus, Vols fans will sweat the Faison Brandon commitment for the next 9 months, but our analyst caught up with the number one player in 2026 and tries to calm the nerves. Also, we asked you on X, who is the best mascot from last year's college football playoff bracket? Can a Shetland pony beat the iconic Nittany Lion in the first round? We'll tell you the results of an extremely tight vote. All that and more as the ultimate college football show starts right now. Welcome into the Ultimate College Football Show. He's Cooper Patagna. I'm Emily Proud. As I just told you, we got a lot happening on today's show. We're talking about mascots. We're talking about all the things that are happening in the world of college sports. But I want to hear from you, Coop. What are you most looking forward to talking about today?
A lot to choose from, but I really want to focus on Troy Taylor, Stanford, Andrew Luck. I mean, there is a lot going on there. And then we got some SEC win totals, Alabama, Oklahoma. So, no shortage of options.
Let's get to it. Let's start with our opening kick. Coop said it, Stanford is in the market for a new head football coach. Troy Taylor was fired on Tuesday, less than a week after an ESPN report detailed investigations into complaints over hostile behavior toward athletic department employees. The big story here, though, is Andrew Luck. The program's general manager made this decision and said in a statement, quote, "I have been thoroughly assessing the entire Stanford football program. It has been clear that certain aspects of the program need to change." He goes on to say, "I no longer believe that Coach Taylor is the right coach to lead our football program." So a general manager is firing a head coach for what we presume is the first time ever. We're still learning so much about this role as a general manager in college football. So what does this move tell you just about how different Andrew Luck's role is compared to what we see across the country?
I think we need to be careful. It's a little bit of an outlier. I think you look at Stanford, their unique situation. You have an AD on the way out. Andrew Luck is obviously somebody that is held with so much of high esteem in Palo Alto, and you think about the trust that they have put in him, tabbed him as the first school's general manager in November, and just a few months later, now is going to have to clean up this mess here with Troy Taylor moving on. So I don't think this is going to be a situation. We've talked a lot about the balance in athletic departments now with general managers really kind of more reporting to not only the head coach, but athletic directors as well. In Andrew Luck's unique case, he's reporting to the president. He's the one that had the full autonomy to make this decision. So after a few months of investigation and obviously what he found there, and then you match that up with the poor results on the field in the first 2 years of Troy Taylor, I think he's making a very difficult decision, but I do believe this is the right decision for Stanford football moving forward.
Yeah, he also mentioned in that statement that the program needed a reset. They need a fresh new outlook on what that future will look like. Troy Taylor, 3-9 in his first 2 seasons. So, of course, you want to find a winner, somebody that's going to win you some football games. But this is a tricky position that Stanford is in, not just from being a part of the NIL era and the transfer portal era that makes it a little bit challenging for them to dip their toes in that water, but it's also March 26th. So what do you foresee the vision of this program is?
Very tricky. And I would not be shocked here if Stanford says, all right, let's take a step back. We understand that we're in the middle of the spring. It's going to be really difficult for us already. December transfer portal is behind us. Now you have the spring transfer portal. I think you could look at Andrew Luck and Stanford saying, hey, let's find a replacement for 1 year who can get us through a situation like this. Chris Peterson kind of comes to mind a little bit, a guy that really kind of identifies with that Northern California area and also the value hierarchy of an academic institution like Stanford. But if you're going to go long-term, here's some other names that kind of come to mind for me. Jeff Choate. If you know anything about West Coast, Mountain West footprint type of football, this guy is one of the most respected coaches out there. Obviously, year one, he's got his work cut out for him in Nevada, but I think that's a guy who could get a call. Spencer Danielson, you think about what he did in year one. He took over a really dicey situation at Boise State in a similar type of situation with Andy Avalos, where there was some disruption in the locker room. And you think about what Boise State was able to do in year one with Ashton Genty and Spencer Danielson. And then some other names that I find pretty interesting as well. Ryan Grubb If you're an Alabama fan, it's like, oh man, this guy again. He came the first time with Kalen DeBoer, and then he was off to the NFL. We'll see what happens there, but he is a pretty interesting option. And then Brett Vegan from Montana State. I think this is such a niche job. It's a specific job. So you and I were just talking before the show. At Stanford, you need to have a critical thinker that understands how to overcompensate, because Stanford is not the same as an SEC athletic department. It's great if the football program can find a way to win some games, but is it going to be the utmost priority? That's where Andrew Luck, his experience playing there, now working there, he's the guy that's going to have to put his thinking cap on and say, okay, who is the type of visionary that we can build and align with here long-term at Stanford? Because the greatest thing that you can sell is a Stanford degree and that education, and nobody can touch that in college football. There are limitations in terms of NIL, how you're going to build your team, guys leaving in the transfer portal and not being able to use the transfer portal, maybe only through the Ivy Leagues that you can access it. So Stanford is a tricky job, but you could thread the needle, but they're going to have to be very, very deliberate about what type of candidate kind of matches what they're looking for.
I do trust that Andrew Luck is the right person in that position, though, to make that tricky decision. As an alum, he understands the certain difficulties that you have to go through with coaching at Stanford versus a traditional ACC program, which that's also strange to point out that they're still in the ACC. But yeah, you definitely have some more trust in the fact that Andrew Luck will make this hire, and it's a big task for him early on in his tenure as the general manager. Another bit of news here that definitely hits close to home at CBS Sports. Gary Danielson announcing his retirement as the lead college football analyst after the 2025 season. He will retire as the longest tenured college football game analyst after 36 years in television. Of course, CBS making the move to being a partner with the Big Ten last season, but we got two SEC fans here. We heard Gary Danielson call a lot of our games back in the day. So what do you remember just about him?
It's like a little piece of your heart departing, him and Uncle Vern. That's kind of how you grow up on Saturdays, watching those guys, 3:30 Eastern time, and all those big games, especially ones that they would flex to the night games. I know you, a Tennessee fan, me, an LSU fan, you think about Saturday in the SEC, first thing that comes to mind, Brad Nessler, Gary Danielson, Verdon Lundquist. Those are always the memories, especially when you're younger, watching those games and those away games. Unbelievable, and we're very grateful that we're obviously on the same team at CBS. And the other thing I'll say about this, Charles Davis, he's got big shoes to fill, but what a wonderful individual, and he's going to do a great job as well.
Yeah, obviously, as a Tennessee fan, very excited about Charles Davis stepping into that role as well. But just a little peek behind the curtain with Gary Danielson. We have these college football seminars before the season starts where we all get ready to go for the upcoming season. It's a giant Zoom call with everybody who calls college football games, which does include little old me sometimes. And we bring on a director of officiating, Steve Shaw, to just ask any questions that we might have with some new rules. Gary is always the one asking the most questions. So if you're ever concerned, after 36 years, is he still into it? Is he still trying as hard as he used to in those early years? Yes, he is highly committed, and especially when it comes to rules, as we know that he loves to make sure that we're getting that right from the official standpoint. But if you are enjoying the show here, the Ultimate College Football Show, make sure you hit that like button. And, of course, we want you to be subscribed so you don't miss a moment of this coverage. And it is the Ultimate College Football Show, which means we like to answer your ultimate burning questions. So if you have any questions right now, you can go ahead, drop them in the chat. We will answer them at the end of the show. Also, we are on the road to 1 billion with a B views. Thank you so much for being a part of that. If you're watching us, you are a part of that, and we will be there soon enough. Very close to hitting that 1 billion mark, and tell your friends. All right, we've already had a lot to talk about on today's show, but we're going to pivot a little bit and talk a little bit more about Alabama and the state of their program, because as I mentioned at the beginning, Kalen DeBoer had some massive shoes to fill stepping in for Nick Saban, but by Tides fan standards, not the best year one. Here's some stats to back that up. A 16-year streak of winning 10 games was snapped. 3 losses versus unranked teams for the first time since 2007. They finished outside the top 10 in the college football playoff poll for just the second time ever, and it was the lowest finish in the polls since 2007. So when we had our Iron Bowl debate with Ronnie Brown, Damien Harris, and Smoke Dixon last week, the conversation kind of turned toward diagnosing Alabama's culture problem. Take a listen.
Damon, you were there with Nick Saban, and culturally, you guys were locked in. If you had to give any advice to Coach DeBoer and Courtney Morgan, the general manager of Alabama, what advice would you give them?
Get off Snapchat with these players and start getting on them to focus on the fundamentals, the techniques, and just caring about what it takes to be complete football players. Because we made a lot of good points here. There's NIL. There's people worried about getting drafted. Now we're living in an era where guys are thinking about sitting out in order to, protect themselves for the next level. One thing that really, really bothered me, and I promise I'm not trying to talk just negatively about Alabama. I'm just speaking openly and from the heart. Some things that really rubbed me the wrong way last year was reports from Kalen DeBoer, CJ Dupree, other guys who were big parts of this program talking about, oh yeah, we've started to let some of the fundamentals slip. Yeah, guys aren't showing up on time to workouts. Guys aren't tucking in their shirts anymore. Guys are wearing a ton of jewelry. Now, I hate to compare the then to the now, but none of that stuff would have ever happened with Nick Saban because we were so bought into the process of doing what he said and abiding by the process that he was setting in front of us because we knew that he knew the ins and outs of the game. We knew he was going to teach us how to be true professionals for when we got to the next level. I mean, one thing he used to always tell us is, you guys want to get drafted high? Well, you've got to play well. You can't worry about what your draft grade is. You can't worry about how many times you get the ball because at the end of the day, if you're not getting the ball as much as you want, but we're having team success, that's going to look better on you. And he just had so many different mechanisms to get us outside of ourselves and inside of the team. And when I look at today's era of college football, and especially at Alabama, because it's this team that I watch and care about the most, I see too many individuals trying to come together and complete a goal without the idea of we all have to be one, essentially. We have to step out of ourselves, step into the oneness of the team, and all do our part to make this one team, this one side of the ball, whether it's offense, defense, special teams. We have to do whatever we can to be bought in. That way we can be our best selves, we can pour into that cup, and that cup can start to run over. There's just too much selfishness. There's too much, focus on TikTok dances, NIL, just things that don't really matter, that ultimately, once you get to the next level, aren't going to serve you any purpose. And I think that it's creating a bad brand of football across the entire NCAA, but for Alabama, it definitely bit them in the rear ends this past season. So again, get off Snapchat, get these guys focused on the fundamentals, the techniques, the details of each play, of each position, and then once guys are bought into that process, then they'll put it out on the field. Then you'll have the outcome that you want.
Yeah, D. Harris, I saw it on the sideline where there's one coach. I don't know who this guy is. Hopefully, I meet him one day. He had every single chain on for every single kid.
It's like, what are we doing? Are you so basically
now you got Ron. Look at Ronnie.
Because this is what bothers me now. Y'all about to get me fired up now.
Look, I'm enjoying this a little bit.
Ronnie, you go into a game. You go into a game, right? Where you got to face an opponent, we used to talk about locking the gates on our opponents, and we don't let them out until the clock strikes 0.
Period.
And for that 60 minutes, that's all we worried about is putting our foot on somebody's neck until they give up. But now we're like, all right, hey, before I go out here, hey, bro, hey, hold on, hey, take my chain real quick. That way, once the game is over, I can put it on and I can, you know what I'm saying? I can get flicked up. I can get my pictures. Everybody can see my diamonds dancing. It's like, what are you really thinking about? Like, are you locked into what you got to do for the next 60 minutes? Because listen, I know we all come from an era of where if you don't step on that field ready to punch somebody in the mouth, somebody gonna punch you in the mouth. Am I right or am I wrong?
You 100% correct.
If you don't step on that field ready to go, you gonna get punched in the mouth. So nowadays, again, kids are just worrying about, okay, like I see so many guys with, like, as soon as the game is over, they're on their phones on the field. And I'm like, when was that even? I would have never even thought about bringing my phone on the field. If anything, I would have went to the locker room after the game was over, went and got it, and then went back on the field. You know what I mean? But it's too many things like that. I don't even want to beat a dead horse. I said something about this during the season. Some people took offense to it. I really didn't care. There was an addition. Now, Proud, I think me and you even talked about this, where whenever we went into Knoxville, went into Neyland Stadium, and there was a coach smoking a cigar on the way, like walking into the stadium. Like, come on, man, you can't do that. That is the definition of putting the cart before the horse, and then you turn around and lose. And now after that, coaches, players are sitting here talking about like, yeah, man, we've lost the fundamentals, we've lost the details, guys aren't on time for workouts. And I'm just like, well, it makes sense why you're getting the result that you're getting, and it makes sense why people are disappointed. So there's an easy fix. Like, this isn't rocket science here. What Coach Saban did, what guys like Bill Belichick have done, all the other great coaches that have, developed dynasties, Dabo Swinney did it at Clemson. It's not hard. You just have a good program. You have a good plan. You have a good blueprint and foundation for these kids. You get them to buy in. The ones who don't want to buy into it, you just kindly and politely open the door because they'll find their way walking out of it. And then you just take the guys who you have who are bought into your process and committed to what you have going on, and you just continue to just sharpen the iron and sharpen the iron and sharpen the details of the plays that you run, how you scheme up for each team, all of that stuff. But that's secondary to just having the players bought in to what it actually takes to be successful. And again, that's fundamentals, that's discipline, that's execution, that's understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And quite frankly, just the game being more important to you than whether it be draft stock for that particular week, or whether it's bringing your chain out or having your phone on the field for post-game media access, like all of that stuff, we can do without that. I think we can all agree that we can do without that extra stuff.
Yeah, and I think we'll agree again. I think too, a big part of that, man, is the game has changed. One, you got probably the greatest coach here again, arguably in college football, to ever coach the game of sports. So that's a hard act to follow. But then you look at it, the nature of it. I do believe, with Coach Saban, he said the standard is the standard, right? That's for everybody, from his little Debbie and his coffee in the morning. The standard is the standard, right? Like, and he let everybody know for even the details of that. But then I think a lot of these coaches have gone to the I mentality, right? It's Coach Saban understood better than anybody, probably, like, good players win ball games, right? I coach them up, but I got to get the players in here. I think he understood that. Whereas now you get some of these coaches, I believe, attitude is a reflection of leadership. Some of these guys are getting hired to get fired. They're not trying to do their job well because they're being incentivized. If I don't do a good job, I sign this contract, I get fired, I get rewarded X millions of dollars. And then I go back into the role that I was most comfortable, whether that's coordinator or position coach. And I think a lot of the players take that mindset. If you don't take it seriously, why should I, right? Like, if you don't have that standard, you don't have that accountability. One thing about when I talk to a lot of young guys, I'm like, hey, man, the way to get to the NFL is being good at your craft, mastering that craft, but being great at the things that don't take talent. That's attitude, attention, and effort, and then punctuality. And so I think you lose the element of that because you get a Coach Saban who harps on the details, right? And he thinks everything matters until it matters. And so the one time you think it's not going to matter. And so you're starting to get a little bit loss of that, or lackadaisicalness, I think, at the top. And it's reflecting on the young men because they don't know what they don't know, right? Coach Saban was going to let you know from the day that you walked into this door, this is what I expect. This is how we do things, and you can do it that way or you cannot, and you can be somewhere else. And so I think we have to emphasize that old school part of it a little bit into this new age, so that there's some type of balance there and understanding what that obligation to as a player. Like, you don't get drafted if you don't play, and the best ability is availability. And if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, you can't expect the rewards.
I love that. Clearly, the guys definitely wanted to talk about the Alabama culture experience that we saw from last season. And if we're talking Bama, we got to bring in Mike Rodak from Bama 24/7. Mike, obviously they were talking about what they saw outside looking in and from last year. But from your perspective, on the ground there in Tuscaloosa, what changes have you seen from last offseason, Kalen DeBoer's first, to now what we're seeing this spring?
Yeah, I mean, last offseason was brand new to Kalen DeBoer. He was trying to balance as much of the Nick Saban way with his way that worked for him at Washington and worked for him at Fresno State. And with, players that had just kind of gone through the shock of the retirement from Nick Saban, and we're trying to get used to a new system and a new way of doing things. And so the biggest change really from year one to year two is that players know what to expect. They've been here before, or they're new players who have specifically come here to play for Kalen DeBoer. So at baseline, that helps. But look, I do think there is some level of tightening the screws a little bit this offseason and trying to make sure that what happened last year doesn't happen again. We did hear Rock Montgomery, one of the backup offensive linemen, come out earlier this offseason and talk about, like Damien said, the jewelry and some of the things that maybe were allowed last year during the offseason program weren't being allowed during the offseason program this year. And that was downplayed a little bit behind the scenes, but at the end of the day, Rock was there every day, during the offseason program. He would know, just like Damien would know what things were like under Nick Saban because he was there every day. So I'm personally not going to discredit anything that was said there, but I think there was a little bit of downplaying of some of the changes and saying, look, whatever happened last year wasn't necessarily bad, wasn't necessarily lackadaisical or undisciplined, but we just want to get things a little bit tighter and a little bit better this year, I think is the main message.
Yeah, and this is not the first time that this has come up. I'm sure that you guys talked about this a lot last fall, that the sky is falling when they're not having near as much success as they had under Nick Saban. But as we've been saying all show, that's an incredibly tough job for Kalen DeBoer to have to come in and to implement his own way while also trying to do what has worked at Alabama for so many years. And I can tell that people are fired up right now in our YouTube chat because they always love this discussion. Is there a culture problem? What do you hear from players as far as the current Alabama culture?
Yeah, again, it's always kind of tiptoeing around the idea of, were we doing something wrong before? And I think players don't want to say that. I think Kalen DeBoer doesn't want to imply that. I think they want to say that they were doing things right before, because then, like Damien said, like, well, why weren't you being on time to meetings? Why weren't you doing all these things the way you should be doing them? And then after the Tennessee game, you decide, it's time to get things back under control. So I think it's a very careful balance when players or coaches are talking about it, because they don't want to make it seem like things weren't under control before. But again, it's just them saying, we got to get back to the standard. We got to get back to winning. Tim Keenan, who's been around this team for 5 years now, he's from Birmingham. He knows this program really well, has talked about last year not being the standard at Alabama and just trying to do things a little bit better across the board. So it's a little bit tricky, in terms of the messaging from players. But again, I think that's kind of the gist of it. And, it's for Alabama, it's just the standard is so high and football has changed, and you can't necessarily do what Nick Saban did for so long with players, because players have changed. Players have more options. They can walk out the door if you're being too hard on them. And you're running them into the ground. So it's a different dynamic that this new coaching staff has to deal with that Nick Saban didn't have to deal with 10 years ago.
Which Nick Saban himself has acknowledged the changes in college football.
Mm-hmm.
Well, speaking of players, we got Ty Simpson, Keelan Russell, and Austin Mack, 3 guys battling for the starting quarterback position. It sounds like they're all getting a fair shot at it, but is there an early leader? If so, who?
I wouldn't say there's an early leader, other than I think Ty Simpson has started the spring in terms of being in the best position to win the job, and I don't think anything has changed to this point. Now, Alabama does have a scrimmage this Thursday, their first scrimmage of the spring. They have another scrimmage next Friday, and then they have their A-Day practice, and that's kind of the meat of real live reps this spring. And so we haven't gotten to that point yet. In about 2 more weeks, there could be a better sense of where the job and the competition stands. But I would not be surprised if this thing goes deep into the fall. Obviously, fall, not the fall itself, but fall camp, August, and getting closer to the start of the season, because they have some options. And Austin Mack has a history with Ryan Grubb and Kalen DeBoer from Washington. Ty Simpson has the most experience of being in college football, but then Keelan Russell has the talent. And I think the same thing about transfer portal. You can't just sit a 5-star player on your bench for an entire year, 2 years, and just expect, he's going to develop and we can play him at some point. Look, in college football these days, you got to play a guy pretty soon. Otherwise, in a lot of cases, they're gone. And I don't think this staff has shown a fear in playing guys early. Obviously, with Ryan Williams last year, he came in the summer. He wasn't even an early enrollee, and he was starting the first game because he was that good. So if Keelan Russell proves himself on the practice field the rest of this spring and in fall camp to be that good, I don't think this staff is going to hesitate in playing him. But again, the safest, the most veteran option they have is still Ty Simpson. And that's kind of your, I don't want to say fallback plan, but at least that's something you've seen him before, what he brings to this team. And that's where I think the favorite conversation probably still leads me.
Definitely a tough decision to have to make, but a good decision and a good problem to have, having to decide between 2 5-star quarterbacks and a guy who was top 10 quarterback in his class and has a lot of experience with Kalen DeBoer. The reason that they're having to decide between who will be the starting quarterback next season is because their starter is off to the NFL and Jalen Milroe. And man, everybody's talking about that 40 time from Pro Day and how that could potentially skyrocket him up some of the draft charts. From your point of view, what do you think his NFL outlook is?
I don't think it's changed as much as the 40 time might imply. And that 40 time itself was a little bit aggressive when Alabama put that 4.37 out. That was faster than what the scouts in attendance were clocking, based on the cameras that were there and the reporters that were there. My own stop clock had a little bit more 4.5 range. So 4.37 was a little bit off, I think. And then I think the official time that they put out later was a 4.40. So fast, but we knew Jalen Milroe was fast. I don't think anybody was necessarily standing there surprised that he ran a good 40 time. And from the get-go, and this is what a GM in the NFL told me back in September, it's going to matter what he does in some of these facility visits, these private workouts that they have when they bring him in to their NFL team facility, and how comfortable do they feel with him being a quarterback running an NFL offense? Because he did do a lot of option stuff at Alabama, obviously relied upon his legs a lot. That doesn't necessarily translate all the time to the NFL, and being able to make the right reads and make the right throws is very important. And I think that's ultimately where teams are going to either feel comfortable about him or have some hesitation. And yes, his pro day might have helped a little bit, but I think you're still talking about a player who's probably a 2nd or 3rd round pick. And it's a team that takes him knowing that there's going to be some level of risk that his style of play, which wasn't always successful at Alabama, might not translate to the NFL.
Yeah, if it took you until March to realize that Jalen Milroe was fast, I mean, what do you do? And we knew that about him. Another player that we know is spectacular, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of him, Ryan Williams. He actually got to catch some passes from Milroe at Pro Day. He finally is 18 years old, but still at least 2 years away from the NFL. What are expectations for him for this upcoming season?
They're big. I mean, he's one of the top receivers in college football, and a lot of that goes back to that Georgia game last year and what we saw from those 2 big catches, especially that second touchdown catch, and really put him on the national scene. And he did have a couple big catches after that. There's one against Vandy that I can remember, but if you look at his stats, there was a pretty big drop-off for Ryan Williams last season. His final 8 games, he only averaged about 40 receiving yards per game. There were 233 players in FBS football that had more receiving yards than him over the final 8 games of last year. So I think a lot of people might point to Jalen Milroe and some of his shortcomings as a passer. They might point to the offensive coordinator last year, Nick Sheridan. Whatever the case may be, I don't know how much blame you want to put on Ryan Williams. There needs to be a big increase in his production in 2025. So whoever's the quarterback, we know who the offensive coordinator is, and Ryan Grubb, who had one of the most prolific offenses in college football a couple years ago at Washington. You need to be able to use Ryan Williams and his skills better, but Ryan Williams also needs to be more consistent as well. There are some issues with drops at times with him. Obviously, that the athletic ability is there with him. We know that. But if he's the phenom that we think he is, he's probably going to be in the NFL in 2 more years. So he's basically a third of the way through his college career. And I think there's a lot of potential that still needs to be reached with him over these potentially last 2 years of his college career.
Mike, I'm excited we have you here because we have some breaking news out of the recruiting world that also pertains to Alabama, and that is that 5-star Jorden Edmonds, the number 1 cornerback in this class, has made his commitment, and he is picking the Crimson Tide. The top 10 prospect in the country was deciding between the Tide and Oregon, but opted to join DeBoer's crew down in Tuscaloosa. Mike, my question for you is, I'm having deja vu all over again. Alabama and DeBoer adding a prolific defensive back. So what does this latest ad say about what they're building in their secondary?
Yeah, Brett Greenberg, our recruiting reporter for Bama 247, was all over this one, expecting Alabama to be the team, and in fact they are. And so it's another 5-star corner. It's 3 years in a row that Alabama has landed a 5-star corner, and they've had some good ones even before that, going back to Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold and Patrick Surtain. So it's a position that annually you feel really good about. at Alabama. Even last year with Xavier Brown coming in, Dijon Lee coming in this year, and then Edmonds, who, like Lee, is a longer, more physical corner, who's 6'2", 6'3", can really play some good press coverage. So that pipeline keeps on moving, and there's been transfers who have come in who are also pretty highly rated kids, and Damani Jackson 2 years ago and Cameron Calhoun now. That position is very well stocked. And really the question for Alabama is, can you keep them all? Because they've also had some issues with losing 5-star corners through the transfer portal, simply because there's nowhere to put some of these guys. But it's certainly a position that recruiting-wise you have not had to worry about with Alabama, and it continues to show you don't have to worry about it going forward.
Yeah, you lose one, you got a few more back there that you can plug in the secondary. Mike Rodak, thank you so much for joining us here to talk some Alabama. Of course, you can check out more of his coverage on Bama 24/7. He mentioned his colleague, Brett Greenberg, has more on this Jorden Edmonds commitment. You can check out his work there. The basketball team, of course, making a run right now in the Sweet 16. So Bama 24/7 has you covered on all things Alabama. We're still talking here about the breaking news. Jorden Edmonds picking the Crimson Tide. Here's national recruiting analyst Tom Loy with more.
Jorden Edmonds is a huge win for Alabama for a variety of reasons. Sure, it's easy to say that. We're talking about a 5-star prospect. We're talking about a position of need at cornerback and a 6'3", 175-pounder at that, a guy who's going to play right away and immediately impact the defense in Tuscaloosa. That's the easy reason to get excited if you're a Crimson Tide fans. But let's look at how they got this done. Because at one point, we absolutely expected Edmonds to be in Alabama's class by now. He was a heavy lean, but he wanted to take his time and make sure that his next decision was his right decision. That opened the door slightly for in-state Georgia and out-of-state Tennessee. However, in the end, this past weekend, that was the moment where Alabama got it done. Nothing else mattered. He visited with his mom, his sisters, some family members, and that was the point where head coach Kalen DeBoer, defensive coordinator Kane Womack, and especially defensive backs coach Mo Linquist sealed the deal, moved the needle, and got it done for the Crimson Tide. Look, in the end, he was looking for a coaching staff that he could truly connect with on a deeper level. He was looking for a place that felt like home, and he was looking for a place that would give him success on and off the field. I believe Jorden Edmonds found exactly that in Tuscaloosa.
And Jorden Edmonds looking for a place to call home and a place that felt like home where he could fit right in, which sounds like what Mike Rodak was telling us earlier, is that these defensive backs coming into Alabama, just it makes sense, right? It's just what we've seen over the years and what we're seeing here now. What does this latest ad tell you?
Well, it tells me a lot what Mike said is, like, Alabama's not slowing down. I think we had a lot of question marks. You know, Andrew and Ivans talked about it in the offseason last year. What was Alabama doing in the southeastern region? That's the biggest thing that I take away. Yeah, they get a great player at a position of strength, but they get him out of the state of Georgia. This is a guy that everybody wanted. I mean, you're talking about the number one corner in the country who has elite-level size, elite-level athleticism, and we got to see him in Atlanta. Hudson Standish down there did a phenomenal job, and in terms of checking all the boxes, it's exactly what Jorden Edmonds provides. So talking about a long reactionary athlete, the ball skills, they flashed, the ball production, we're still waiting on a little bit, but the raw physical tools are really hard to come by. And then you think about what they've added in that defensive backfield over the last couple years in Tuscaloosa. Mike mentioned Xavier Brown. You think about Zay Mincy and Mbakwe as well. Dijon Lee, another guy that kind of fits that 6'4" prototype. An embarrassment of riches. I haven't even talked about Ivan Taylor or Chuck McDonald as well. So give Alabama, Kalen DeBoer, Courtney Morgan, big A+ there.
So where does he fit among all of those great defensive backs that he's now going to have to compete against for some playing time?
He's just going to be another one of those guys. And, you know, Damien kind of brought it up. It wasn't long ago before the transfer portal era. Guys like that, Marlon Humphrey, D. Milner, they had to sit. It wasn't always that you played early. And some of these guys, it's a blessing in disguise that you have to sit, wait, and develop. And I think Jorden Edmonds, the guys behind him as well, some of the names that I mentioned before, they're going to have to sit because there are a lot of good players in front of them. Damani Jackson, Xavier Brown, some of those guys that I mentioned, Xavier being the rare guy that played early. But the way that they are building that room, some of these guys are going to have to be a little bit more patient.
Yes, and as Mike was saying as well, there might not be some patience, and you might have to worry about losing some of those guys to the transfer portal. But when you just have the stockpile of great defensive back talent, you can afford to
Good problem
lose
to
one
have.
or two. It's a fantastic problem to have. Yes, we all feel very bad for Alabama and trying to hold on to all of those 5 stars. But hey, if you enjoy commitments, well, we are Commit HQ, as we like to call you, and we are as active as ever. Coming up on April 7th, we'll bring you this live commitment from one of the top tight ends in the class. Brock Harris will make his decision live on this show. He is picking between BYU, Georgia, Miami, Michigan, Oregon, and Utah. So we asked you to help us out with our ultimate bracket this week. We are talking mascots, and as opposed to bringing on analysts, because we don't have a lot of mascot analysts to debate who the best mascots are, we asked you on Twitter to vote. And this is all based off of last year's college football playoff bracket. So not necessarily the best ever, just the best that were in competition last year. And I do need to mention that Notre Dame automatically advances. Indiana does not have a mascot, so they're moving on to that next round. But you see the first round winners. Bevo coming away with the win. Will face against Sparky the Sun Devil. Smokey with a massive first round win over Brutus Buckeye will go up against the Duck. And the Nittany Lion, I will tell you, this was a very close competition between him and Peruna the horse, or the pony. And now they'll have to face up against Buster Bronco. Then we've got the Leprechaun and Uga. So I said we don't have any analysts that are necessarily, you know, this is their niche in terms of talking about mascots, but you are sitting right here. So, Coop, does anything stand out?
Yeah,
to
glad
you?
I could be here to
Yes.
comment on this.
I
yeah,
hope you have some
Peruna,
analytics and stuff as well that you can back with your
for
argument.
sure. I was pretty excited about Peruna.
Yeah. It was a close one.
Peruna covered, from what we understand.
Yes.
So
Great
Peruna
horses
not
covered.
winning that, and then Indiana just no showing in the first round. A little bit disappointing.
Yeah.
That darn Leprechaun too. We'll see what happens with the matchup next week against Uga, and then the Duck. I mean, you gotta think the strongest mascot brand in all of college football, right? Going up against Smokey.
I know.
We'll see what happens. 1-9 matchup.
Well, the reason that Smokey was able to absolutely dominate is, you know, I'm not breaking any news here, but there are a few Tennessee fans online. They have figured out how to use the internet there in Knoxville, and they love to vote for the cute mascot that is Smokey. So
it's a good-looking pup.
that's going to be a tough one. Who do you want to see maybe in the championship? Are there early leaders for you that you think we could see down the line?
I love the Duck. What was the other name? Puddles?
Puddle.
We try to avoid that.
His official name is Puddles, but we're supposed to just call him the Duck.
The Duck, the legal name, the Duck. Yeah, I would like to see a Duck and I think the Leprechaun too.
Leprechaun, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that'll be interesting.
Honestly, I don't know why I said
All
that. I'm not a
green
huge fan of the
mascot
Leprechaun, but we'll see. Yeah, but all green, I think you can't go wrong at this point.
Okay. Well, that was just the first round. So the second round of voting has officially begun. So we have a ways to go until we crown an official champion, the best mascot in college football. So make sure that you head to our page on X. It is the pinned tweet. Do I say tweet? I don't know. The pinned post is on our X account right now on @247sports. So go and vote for what you believe is the best mascot in college football. It is time for some College Football Confidential with our friend and national college football writer, John Talty. And John, I'm calling this one the Carolinas edition. You went on a bit of a road trip over the last few weeks and got to listen and speak with some people within the programs that are located in the Carolina region. So let's start in Columbia, South Carolina, where you spoke with Shane Beamer coming off a almost trip to the playoff last season. So what did he tell you about expectations going into this season?
Yeah, I think South Carolina is at such an interesting moment here where, as you said, they just missed making the playoffs. One of the teams that had the best arguments to make the playoff. Their return, I think, and I'm curious what, maybe Cooper has a different thought, but potentially two of the best building blocks in all of college football in Lenore Sellers at quarterback, and then you got an edge rusher and Dylan Stewart. It's a great building block, but they lose a lot of guys too. And so I think for Shane, it's trying to manage expectations to a certain point. Not that he's afraid of them, not that he doesn't know how big this year can be, but knowing that they do lose multiple guys who are going to get drafted in April, that they do have a lot of replacements to figure out. And I think this spring is a really important moment to see, okay, what do we might still need to get from the portal? Do these, all these wide receivers that we got out of the high school ranks, are they good enough to be the weapons we need for Lenora Sellers and on and on? So I think South Carolina is an exciting team to watch. They're going to be a trendy, I think, playoff pick, and there's still some things to figure out beyond just kind of those top two marquee names in Lenoris and, of course, Dylan.
They're a really fascinating team, John. I'm glad you kind of brought up Lenora Sellers and Dylan Stewart. Dylan Stewart is kind of the guy that I think is going to have bigger shoes to fill, actually, with what they did last year. You talk about that unit and the success that they had. They're losing a lot of guys. So, for me, I think the biggest thing, South Carolina kind of surprised a lot of teams last year in the SEC. They got better and better, almost pulled off wins versus LSU and Alabama. They win one of those two games. They're probably in the playoffs, like you alluded to. I want to know, John, just your level of confidence talking to Shane Beamer in terms of how they feel internally about, can this team take the next step, make the college football playoff this year? Because I think a lot of the expectations in Columbia with a lot of their fans is, all right, we have the guy in Lenora Sellers that a lot of people are talking about as a Heisman contender. Can this team overcome a lot of those departures on the defensive side of the ball, and especially in terms of pass catchers as well, take that next step and go to a college football playoff?
Yeah, they're really bullish so far on their freshman receivers that they have. Again, it's super early, but I think that they really like the group that they got. Nick Harbor is a guy that they're very excited about. We all know that guy is a freak and has not been devoted solely to football until this spring. We'll probably get into more of that later, but that I think is a piece that they're like really excited about. Think they can do a lot, with him. But yeah, it's an interesting moment. And I talked to Shane because I think we've talked about this on this show too, other schools where they feel like this is the all-in year, this is the all-in moment. And I don't get that sense from South Carolina. I feel like they feel like they can be competitive for multiple years. They got very close to making it last year. They feel good about this year. I think if you look at the youth of some of these guys, could have them for another year. So there's a range, there's a window here that I think is not solely this year, but certainly, again, when you have a guy like Sellers, who could be, one of the best QBs, if not the best QB South Carolina has had in a very long time, if he lives up to the expectations. It's a South Carolina kid. There's a lot of attention around him, and you do have to capitalize on that moment. And I think Shane Beamer is very aware of that, and they like where they're at right now, both in terms of what they added out of the portal and also the high school guys that they brought in.
And Sellers would certainly like if former five-star wide receiver Nick Harbor, as you said, finally gets going this season. You spoke with some people around the program. What did they tell you as far as expectations for him to take in this upcoming year?
Yeah, they're high. I mean, I think he talked about the other day getting his eyes fixed. So that's, that always helps, maybe help catching some balls. And one of the things that I thought was interesting, I talked to some coaches about it, and I talked to Lenoris about it, that Lenora Sellers played a role in convincing Nick Harbor to stop doing track. Basically told him, listen, man, like, it's time. Like, we've got a moment here. Like, we need you all in. Because as you guys know, you can do two sports. We've seen football players play baseball and track, but it's hard. It's hard to be great at either. I feel like sometimes you almost lower your ceiling in both, trying to deal with both, trying to stay healthy in both. And I think they felt like Harbor maybe had not met his full potential in football by having to try to do both. And I thought, it was telling that a guy like Lenora is still a young guy, could have that kind of relationship with Nick to be like, all right, man, like, let's do this. It's time. I need all of you. And it resonated with Harbor, and here he is doing all football for the first time since he's been at South Carolina.
Yeah, we kind of knew when we ranked Harbor as a five-star coming out. I mean, this was a guy, dynamic athlete. We really hadn't seen anything like him. I mean, you think about the size, the athleticism combination, two-way player. I know you and I were kind of talking about it a little bit yesterday. I actually thought that his ceiling would be the highest on the defensive side of the football. And him playing two sports has kind of made this transition to the college game a little bit harder to navigate because he's been all in on the track and field side, obviously trying to qualify for the Olympics. John, I'd be interested to know, have they seen a difference just in terms now with the time being committed to football, I guess, when you would say, talking about his development really as a route runner, a pass catcher as well, those are two areas where I think he's needed to take a step. Have they seen a little bit of, I guess, the investment off the field now with the time solely focused on the football field?
Yeah, I think they have. I mean, it's obviously it's early in spring, and so there's still quite a few practices to go. You'll get fall camp too, but yeah, I mean they feel really good about them. And again, I think that's why one of the things that I wondered going to South Carolina was felt like they might need a portal receiver or two. They had gotten a lot of high school guys. It still felt like maybe they needed one or two more guys. And asking around about it, it's kind of like, well, like Nick Harbour is kind of that guy. Maybe we haven't seen all of him to this point, but we believe really strongly in what he's able to do, what we've seen so far, and just kind of just as you mentioned, Coop, just pure physical attributes. And this guy is freaky fast, freaky athletic. That they can really mold that and do even more of that. Just having him around the building more, and then also getting to work with Mike Shula, who I'm really bullish about, I think was a great QB coach, offensive coordinator at a bunch of places. I think he's going to be really good for not only Lenore Sellers, but also for guys like Nick and other, offensive guys that they've either added or are trying to build up moving forward.
I remember when he was coming out of high school, it was all about like, we'll figure out the rest later, but just an athlete like that you want to have on your football team and you want to have on your campus. So interesting to see what he does when he's focused on all ball coming up this fall. You also made the trip to Durham, where Duke is currently trying to chase a national championship in basketball, which, from the outside looking in, it seems like not a lot of the attention has been put on football at the moment. But what are you learning from the athletic offices? How are they feeling about balancing both football and basketball?
It was fun. I was in Durham the first day of their NCAA tournament where they were playing in Raleigh. Then you had women's basketball also playing that day. So there was something a little funny about doing a football story in Durham the day that Duke is playing basketball. And all anybody cared about was Cooper Flagg. And I was probably the one person not asking about Cooper Flagg that day in the building. But, I think that kind of similar to South Carolina in some ways, you had, maybe better than expected year last year. You win 9 games. Mike Elko did a good job a couple years ago before he left for A&M. Manny Diaz just kind of helping elevate that even more. You go out and get Darian Mensah, who, as we all know, has gotten a lot of attention. That was a big kind of splashy move for them to, depending on who you talk to, maybe nudge Malik Murphy out a little bit to bring in Darian Mensah. And to me, it represented this moment of like, okay, Duke is going for it, right? Duke football feels like there's an opportunity here. They've got a guy they really believe in Manny Diaz, and they feel like now's the time to be a bit more aggressive. And I think that it's going to be challenging for schools that want to be great at a lot of things. Duke is one of them, where not only is it men's basketball, but also women's basketball is really good. And how you divide up that rev share money, it's going to be tricky for a lot of places, including Duke. But I think that they feel really confident about what they did last year, and reason to be, really bullish and optimistic for this upcoming year and moving on, just with Manny and kind of the youth and what they've built nucleus-wise so far in that roster.
John, do you think Duke and some of these other teams in the ACC and maybe even around the country look at a team like SMU and look at their first-year success in a new conference in the Power Four and say, hold on, why aren't we doing what SMU is doing in year one in the ACC? They see an opportunity. You mentioned Malik Murphy. They go out, and they're trying to go from above average to good to potentially even great now in the ACC and punch their way to a college football playoff. How much do you think SMU's success had anything to do with what we've seen Duke do this offseason?
Yeah, I think it does. And one of the ones that I talked to people there about was Indiana too, right? Indiana is a traditional basketball school, and they had a lot of success in year one with Kurt Cignetti and it, challenging Big Ten Conference, make what you will about their schedule, but they showed what's capable year one. You mentioned SMU. That's another one where it felt like, ACC has always been in some ways underrated. Their coaches would tell you that the football is better than maybe how we've made it out to be. But to me, it did show, there's a clear lane here. There's a window, whether it's, Clemson, SMU, Florida State, Duke, there's some different schools that you're seeing that have a real shot. UNC with Bill Belichick, that if SMU can come in and do this in year one, that we should have a shot to do it too. And I think that's, why you've seen the investments, why you've seen guys stay. Duke did a good job of retaining a lot of their, not only their player talent, but also their coaching talent. There's some coaches that I'm pretty bullish about on that roster. So I think that's all kind of a part of what they see as this opportunity to, maybe it's not every year, but that if you kind of ramp up right and you keep building, that you have a real shot to make a run like SMU did or Indiana.
You mentioned the Darian Mensah situation, obviously getting a lot of publicity for that reported $8 million contract over 2 years, which is not something that we've typically seen from Duke football in terms of that kind of player investment. But where else are we maybe going to be surprised by the investment that Duke is putting into their football team in this offseason?
Well, I mean, Coop's the expert here, but I like some of the guys they grabbed out of the high school ranks. I think they got Bryce Dallas. I think it's their maybe top-ranked guy everywhere at a Grimsley High School, which was there as part of my trips through Carolina too to see Faison Brandon. But that's I think a top 70 recruit that is a good player. Could have gone other places, going to Duke. They got, I think, a 4-star offensive lineman out of Pennsylvania. That's a guy who maybe doesn't typically go to Duke in the past. So I think that they like what we saw with Stanford under David Shaw. Duke knows that they have to swim in maybe a smaller pool than other places, whether it's not only to get guys in academically, but also, as they've explained to me, for those guys who succeed academically. There's certain kids that are really going to fit that mold. So they might not ever sign a top 15 recruiting class, but I think they like the guys that they've got. And I think we've seen under Manny that recruiting elevate a bit, where they're, adding guys that they like at the high school ranks. And again, then you supplement that with a Darian Mensah, who you hope can put you over the top, especially vertically, which I think they felt like they were a little bit limited with what they were able to do last year. And with Mensah, they can tailor that offense to be more aggressive.
You said through your trips through the Carolinas, you also spoke with the number 1 recruit in 2026, which is Tennessee quarterback commit Faison Brandon. And most of the conversation when we talk about him on this show is I'm asking one of our recruiting analysts, how nervous should Vols fans feel about securing his commitment? But I want to ask you, after having a conversation with him, how excited should Vols fans be if they're able to hold on to Faison Brandon about what his potential is?
Just a great kid. I mean, to start there, just very even keeled. He reminds me in some ways of Nico, the guy they already have, and that he just doesn't seem to get too high or too down. He's very even keeled, feels built for this kind of current moment. Was talking to him about, just the pressure that comes with being the number 1 overall recruit, the pressure that comes with, he was in a national lawsuit, suing the state of North Carolina. He seems to handle that really well. And I think that makes me feel confident about his ability to handle some of the things that are going to come with a fan base that cares a lot, 100,000 plus fans, a lot of pressure that can come with being the Tennessee QB. He seems to be really well suited to handle that. Of course, physically, there's a lot to like. There's been a lot of good talent that's come through Grimsley. I mentioned one earlier, and talking to their coach, this guy is just different, right? Built different. The way he throws the ball is just different. So there's just a lot to like. Again, Coop could probably talk to you even better than I can about just physically what he can bring on the table, but I think also just from the off the field, mental, emotional components of how do you handle this current era of college football, I think he's really well built for that.
Well, I think it's a great opportunity to get to talk about the makeup of the kid and what it takes to be the number 1 player in the country. Yesterday we're on this show, we're talking about the last 8 years and doing a bracket of, all right, which one of these guys would move on. But specifically with the quarterbacks, and even not the quarterbacks, you look at Jeremiah Smith, you look at Travis Hunter, what all these guys had in common, with all due respect, outside of Antonio Alfano, and we talked about him, was the wiring. To be the number 1 player now, yes, obviously you have to have the physical traits. You have to have the desired physical makeup that NFL teams seek, also colleges seek at the highest level as well. But these guys have gone to have tremendous amount of success at every level because of the way that they're wired. And you think about Faison Brandon in the way that he's put together, being around him at Elite 11 in Atlanta, seeing him at multiple exposures. He came down, competed San Antonio at the All-American Bowl, and threw when he didn't have to. So this is a guy that the more that we're around him, we know the true ability of the player, the person in terms of the wiring and what that's going to look like, because the pressure is going to be tenfold and it's going to be ramped up at every level, right? What's it going to look like on Saturday? What's it going to look like on Sunday? And that's what Nico Iamaleava is going through right now in Knoxville. They expect him to take a step. So when you have the blessing and the burden of being the number 1 player in the country, there's a lot of different ways that you can handle it. You can either rise to the occasion or you can fold under that pressure. I think Faison Brandon is made of the right stuff. And I think Tennessee, if you're a Tennessee fan, you got to be happy that you have 2 signal callers like Nico Iamaleava, Faison Brandon. What they have under Josh Heupel, give him a lot of credit because that's hard to find anywhere else in the country.
He honestly reminds me some of, from a demeanor standpoint, the guy who was number one in your bracket and Bryce Young. I mean, there's just something about him, very cool and collected. Covered Bryce closely at Alabama, and you trusted him to make the right decisions in crucial moments because again, he didn't get too hot or too low. And not to knock on him, but I covered Mac Jones very closely at Alabama and ended up having a great year and led him to a national championship. But the early knock on Mac, and Nick Saban said this to his face, was that like you're like John McEnroe, like you're just wild and up and down. You miss a throw, I don't even have to see the play. I can just read it on your face and know that you missed the guy. And that's not how you have to be as a QB, especially I think in this current world. And so I think Faison handles that again really well. And that's the thing that, whether it's Coop or other guys, I think it's always the hardest thing to kind of judge and know is the kind of the makeup, the demeanor, we can see the physical tools, but how does this guy handle that 3rd and 8 game on the line? What do you do? That takes a lot of mental toughness. And I think sometimes guys, whether in college or go on to the NFL, it's always the hardest thing to fully know what's inside a guy's head until you put him through it. And we'll see how he handles college. But again, just from what I've seen, talking to his coach, talking to other people around him, he seems to have a lot of what you want makeup-wise. Again, to handle, playing in the SEC, that's not easy, but I think he has a lot of what you want. And again, if I'm a Tennessee fan, I don't think there's anything to be worried about. I'm not the recruiting expert, but I don't think there's anything to be worried about. But I'm a Tennessee fan. I'm extremely excited and very hopeful that he does sign on the dotted line and that he enrolls in December as expected.
I can tell you too, John, there's a lot of Tennessee fans who are excited about the prospect of having that young man on their campus in just a few years. Thank you, John. Hey, John Talty and Armin Katayan, they wrote the book on the current college football landscape. It is very interesting. You can check out the price, what it takes to win in college football's era of chaos, and find it wherever you get books these days. Time now for some ultimate burning questions. You sent them in. Now, Cooper has to answer them. This one comes on Instagram via @KBads. Any advice for a college athlete trying to navigate the transfer portal, not by choice, mind you, and find a new home? It's often the side of the transfer portal that we don't talk enough about, Coop.
Yeah, that's always a difficult part of the process. It's been part of the game for quite some time. I mean, it was part of the game when I was back doing what I was doing, a handful of years ago. So, yeah, it's always tricky. But I think the biggest thing is to go where you're valued. That's really important. I know that sounds really simple, but the other part of that I think a lot of people struggle with is constructive criticism, which is what that conversation is. Maybe when you're getting pushed out of a situation you thought was going to be advantageous for you when you signed, it's being able to look inwardly and say, okay, do I have the amount of humility that it takes to say that maybe I can't play at this level? Maybe I have to go find a new home. And then what are my goals? And how does my new destination align with my vision for myself as my own personal entity? And you have to look at it that way. It's really a business decision. People say that a lot. They throw that around very, very loosely. But you have to look at that in terms of, okay, who's going to develop me the best? Who's going to have the best culture? Who's going to have the best environment? And then from an alignment standpoint, what is it? What am I trying to get out of this experience? Because not everybody, regardless of what sport you play, is going to have the opportunity to play professionally. There might be some other things that draw you to a place, and that's the biggest thing. Make sure you have a really good sense of self first and understand what it is that you want out of the experience. Then you can ask the hard questions on what makes sense for you going forward.
It's hard to be pushed out of a place, especially one that you go through the recruiting process. You feel like this is the place for me. But like you said, ultimately, you don't want to be where you're not wanted.
And I'll say this too, like being in sports on the coaching side, on the players side, being fired is part of the process, right? It doesn't matter if you're being released or being let go. It's really difficult. Sometimes it ends up being the best thing that ever happens to you. So understanding how to bounce back, just something in a long list of things that happen in your life. It's just kind of part of naturally maturing and growing.
Life experience might not feel good in the moment, but ultimately that's where the growth happens. Thank you for that question @KBads. We got another one here from Instagram @CamRhino11. Best returning roster of any Division I college football team. You have 130 plus to choose from. Who you got?
All I do is criticize Dabo Swinney's roster building ability, only to come on this show and say he's probably got the best returning roster in all of college football. You think about what Clemson has, especially on the offensive line. very experienced. I believe 4 out of 5 starters coming back there. And then you think about Cade Klubnik, third highest odds to win the Heisman Trophy. Absolutely most talented receiving core that they've had in quite some time. TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco, Antonio Williams. You go down the list. They're a very, very talented group. And then defensively, that front seven, TJ Parker, Peter Woods. And then you think about Clemson playing a lot of young guys last year. They led all of college football with 21 underclassmen that played over 200-plus snaps. That's a huge thing for them. So we're going to know a lot about Clemson week 1 of the season. Big test for both LSU and Clemson in Death Valley, the one in South Carolina. But Clemson, to me, was the team that is the most talented roster coming back. So give Dabo Swinney a lot of credit. The other team I thought of, Penn State.
Ooh, I like that. That's the thing. It's a tough question because there's a lot of talent, maybe more talented teams, but returning roster is, of course, a big part of it. And that's what Dabo likes to hang his hat on. Thank you for that question. We got another one here from Instagram at Levi.Reed12. Realistically, do you all think that Oklahoma wins 9+ games this year in football? 9. Let's look at that schedule. Run through it. What do we think?
Realistically, they can do it. But to be able to do that, John Mateer, Ben Arbuckle, those two, that tandem together, they're going to have to be everything we think they can be and a lot more. I mean, look at these last 7 games, starting with Texas here. Absolutely brutal. You have Texas in that rivalry, and then you're on the road at South Carolina. I've talked a lot about how dangerous I think this Ole Miss team can be. A playoff team in Tennessee, on the road in Tuscaloosa. Missouri adds Ben Prabula. And then you have LSU, who I've talked about that I think is one of the most well-positioned teams in the entire SEC. So Oklahoma, I think this is going to be a really tricky situation, especially for fans there in Norman, because you have Brent Venables on a little bit of a hot seat there, and then you bring in John Mateer. They've done a good job via the portal as well. I think this is going to be a team right around 7 to 8 wins, maybe not get the 9 wins. How do you do it? I think that's important. If they can beat Michigan in the second win of the season, I think they can get off potentially to a 5-2, 6-1 start. So the fast start for Oklahoma, really, really important.
FanDuel currently has their win total at 6.5. So
smashing it. I love it.
Smashing it.
Yeah,
there we go.
give it to me.
Got some betting advice here from Cooper Batag. We got one more question that you sent in for our ultimate burning questions. Thank you so much. At Rammer Jammer Big Bammer. That is a long handle, but I think I know what the question is going to be about. What is Alabama's win total for 2025?
I like high side 9-3 in the regular season. I like low side 8-4. You know, this is a tricky schedule. The thing that we talked about a little bit earlier in the show with Mike Rodak is, what does the quarterback situation look like? That's everything. Everything hinges on who the quarterback is going to be. And you look at the first game of the season, we have no idea what Florida State's going to look like coming off the season that they had last year. Thomas Castellanos, Gus Malzahn, Deuce Robinson, they're a dangerous team. At Georgia, that's going to be tough. At Mizzou is going to be tough. So that is a very, very testy schedule. How they end, I think, will be really, really important as well. But I think a 9-3, 8-4 season for Alabama.
Well, FanDuel has them at 8.5. So right in the middle. So that's a tough one for you if you have either 8 or 9 wins. But that's all right. We have some time before the college football season ends. Too much time, as we would say. But thank you so much for joining us here on the Ultimate College Football Show. You can catch us here every Monday and Wednesday at 4 Eastern on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. We'll see you back here Monday.